So I need to know what to write or whatever.
You're perfect. We need audience.
Okay. Oh, right, right. See, what about kindness? And she was first.
Yeah. Great. All right. Sure.
Thank you.
I'm going to have our son's family and our youngest daughter.
All right, you're good to go. You're good. We're already on.
Thank you.
We're already on.
Jane, have you thought out? Awesome. Her other two daughters. She said she got it. Just a little more. But I'm glad you have her.
How are you?
It's soft, no, it's soft.
I know.
I'll give you a pencil. And you've got paper, so you're good.
That's number two.
You doing all right these days? My daughter and daughter-in-law and son and grandson over yesterday. He's about 2 years and 4 months now. You slept well last night. I tell you, you can't bottle that much energy.
I wish you could bottle it.
Isn't that the truth?
I'd buy it.
I could probably use about a third of it. I was talking about the energy of our 2 year and 4 month old grandson.
Where were you at?
They were at the house yesterday. They live in Asheville, so they had some clothes that needed to be washed.
We have a granddaughter that did the same thing. She's coming back
Here you go. This is just for a little.
using the mom's washer and dryer.
He's got water sort of chalky.
That's what happened to Melody. That it's still under a boil order.
I don't know how long it takes to get all that set It's been tough. You know, when we went through Hugo's hearing, that was tough.
That's why,
I'm gonna give this to you just for a little more. Sure.
Oh, yeah.
For a while.
Welcome. It's good to see you here.
Finally, it just got
All right, starting over. Welcome to today.
It's a little warm up exercise. Okay, Pam is trying to speak.
Yeah. I'm glad we're all here together, and this is Shawn's second and last session on kindness. Last week was inspirational and heartwarming, and we're here today to have Shawn lead us in our last session together. So Shawn, thank you.
Thank you so much for returning. I think some people would have just fled. Okay, so a lot of you have stories to tell, and I'm excited to hear them. So we will get right in with our warm-up. Sure. Okay. Go ahead. On your little piece of paper, just write what this number, what it evokes in your head. Go ahead and write that.
Does anybody else need paper?
There's absolutely no right answer, just getting our brains going.
The age at which we become an adult officially and can do a lot of things that you couldn't do before.
You did anything?
All right, so hang on to that. Give you like 10 more seconds, and then we'll say them verbally. Okay, so the age at which we become an adult. I love the fact that you had quotes. Yes, okay, that's a great one.
Blackjack.
Blackjack. Awesome.
The year I was born, in Japanese emperor's name was Shawn Emperor. I was born the 21st year of his reign.
Oh, wow.
That's interesting.
This is a long course, but we can't hear you and the people on Zoom can't hear you. So if you can, and I'll pass this around.
Okay, I was born Showa 21年, which means Showa 20, first of the year. That was usually Showa is really named after the emperor's name. So I was born the 21st year of his reign.
And you held the mic really nicely.
Yeah.
Anything else that's different from those?
End of a countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, John did it. John split it and made it 2-1. I love that creativity.
We had to be 21 to vote.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so once upon a time, a voting age? Yeah.
I remember 21 distinctly because then I was no longer contributing to custodial accounts.
Interesting. All right, anything that we haven't covered? I love this creativity. This is far more creative than. So 21 guns and a salute. Legal drinking age, we covered. This is so random, but if you add all the little pips on the dice or on a die, adds up to 21. Some of you know Adele, the famous singer, one of her titles, and you guys covered blackjack. Awesome. Okay, your brains are elastic. We're ready to go. Okay. I want you to do the same thing with run. And I'm going to cut you off only because we have a more packed class. Okay, hands up, and I can do them.
Okay.
A warning, run.
Excellent. A warning.
Run for office.
Election.
Election, running for office. Oh, I forgot to turn this on.
You probably will.
Goodness. Okay.
Something we can't do anymore.
Learning to read, Dick, run, Jane. run.
That's what.
Ah, nice. That was learning to read. See Dick run.
Yeah, don't use that one plus yours.
All right. Oh,
Yeah.
How about a run of cards?
excellent. Wait, why is it so loud?
I'll turn it down.
Do you think?
Yeah, usually it got turned up because it was used by the other.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, that's right.
And then Betty, when you're done, give it.
A run that you get in your stocking.
Operate like a machine or manage like a company.
Behind you?
The score in the baseball game.
Okay. Can you hear me? Is it too loud? Okay, thank you, John.
Oh, here, one more.
I love it. From primary literature to a run in your stocking to baseball to doing something you can't do. I bet you can still run. All right, I am going to skip this exercise, but I am going to tell you about it because it's something fun to do. It's in my novel. The protagonist is a 17-year-old girl being raised by her aunt, and they have a game they play, and they say, "Please explain," and they give a scenario, and it can be anything. The one that I use in my book is he always pays for his groceries with cash. Please explain. And then you go off, and it can be as wild an explanation as you wish. But it's a nice way to both have fun with imagination and to I can't even think of the word, emphasize empathy. I was getting those words mixed up in my head. Yes, so it may be that inside we have that judgy voice saying, "Oh, why is she wearing that?" Or "Why can't he be more?" And then you think, well, what's really going on, or what's the backstory? But we're not going to do that because a lot of you have stories, and I'd like to get to that. Oh, shoot, wait. Okay, if we have time at the end, I have 3 of these Hidden Brain podcasts. Did anyone go and listen to some of those? Okay, no problem. If we don't have time today, I will put these, John will put these in an email, and you can listen to them because they're quite moving. But without further ado, I would love to turn this over to you because I'm so excited to hear your stories. So you are welcome to come up here, or you are welcome to sit where you are, and we'll bring a mic to you. Do we have a brave soul who is anxious to begin? Or who is very kind and willing to begin?
This is a class on kindness. Okay.
Awesome.
Do you want the mic? Or?
Probably. I mean, if I stand up there, I'll need a footstool.
Okay.
I'm gonna turn the camera so it will face the class.
That's scary, John.
Okay, I can stand up.
All right.
Now he's turned, okay.
And actually, I'm so sorry, just for those of you who didn't have the opportunity to be here last week, the assignment was to think of a time, a very tiny, tiny incident in your life. It could be recent, it could be a long time ago, when someone was kind to you, you experienced a kindness that made a difference and that you obviously still remember. Thanks.
All right. Leaving my life of 35 years in Atlanta, I moved to Davidson in June of 2020 to begin a new chapter at the Pines. Unfortunately, at the time, I was extremely ill with an undiagnosed thyroid problem, which, because untreated during COVID, left me not only physically but mentally very sick. The Pines was not ready for me to move after all. So I rented a garage apartment in Davidson to begin my life, often in isolation thanks to COVID. When December arrived that year, I took myself to the traditional candlelight service at DCPC. Remembering that service had been a favorite of my late mother and feeling quite homesick, I got in line to receive a candle in the vestibule. Someone I had seen around the church but did not really know handed me a candle, and as she did so, looked me in the eyes after saying hello, then said with incredible compassion, "Are you doing all right?" To my knowledge, she had no way of knowing what I was going through at that time. Her outreach and display of empathy was exactly what my lonesome soul needed at that moment. I will forever be grateful to that person for her tenderness and concern and for making my first Christmas in Davidson a warm one.
Thank you, Martha. Lacey, John, then.
Mine is entitled Coach Powell. I was the youngest, the shortest, the lightest, probably the weakest, certainly the smallest boy in Miss Hazel Hope's 7th grade homeroom. In comparison to the size of the girls in the class was even more humbling. I guess it all started when my parents accepted the suggestion that I do the 1st and 2nd grades in one year. I did, and it was a game of physical catch-up for me all the way to college. Contrary to all those liabilities of size and strength, I had an intense desire to be an athlete. Some sports, basketball, baseball, maybe tennis, were within the reach of mediocrity for me. Others, like football, were off the table, but I was mostly content with my lot. A major challenge came during that 7th grade year, though, when I decided to try to complete the athletics merit badge for my Boy Scout program. The requirements of the badge included some familiar things that I could do well, but they also had some activities foreign to my experience, the shot put and the long jump in particular. My designated merit badge counselor was the PE instructor and coach at my school. His name was George Powell. He was tall and lanky, fresh from one of the teachers' colleges in his native North Carolina mountains. He was known to run a tight ship in gym class, not averse to the application of corporal punishment with his Board of Education. I was more than a little afraid of him, but I really wanted to earn that badge, so that was that. On the day of my testing, after school on the dirt and gravel playground back of school, I felt I was clearly infringing on time that Coach Powell had wanted for himself. At least his hawk-like face and his usual dour demeanor seemed to convey that expression. He called me Kuykendall, prima facie evidence that we were not exactly enemy friends. It didn't take long for me to demonstrate the things that I could do. But when it came to the aforementioned shot put and long jump, I tried and tried without success. And the more I tried, the more I fell short. And I was very much aware that I was occupying Coach Powell's after-school hours. I know that I got rattled. There might have even been a tear or two of frustration or embarrassment or just downright failure. As I was about to fall to pieces right there in the schoolyard, Coach Powell said, "Kuykendall, we've got all afternoon to make sure you get this right, and I'll be here with you. Got absolutely nothing to do that is more important than this." I tried, and he tried, and we tried, and I finally put the shot 24 feet and 1 inch, or so he said, and I cleared the mark for the long jump by an infinitesimal measure. It took an incredible amount of time and a remarkable amount of patience and kindness on the part of Coach George Powell. About 60 years later, I sat in the sanctuary of Holy Comforter Episcopal Church in Charlotte, joining the congregation and a number of my schoolmates for the funeral of George Parker Powell, a man who had been so kind to me when I was the littlest guy in his class.
Our family had a wonderful old beach house for 45 years at Polly's Island, South Carolina. Now, the drive to Polly's is a 4-hour plus drive, no matter which route you take. I was frequently asked by friends the dreaded question, how do you drive to Polly's? Now, there is no good or direct route. But over the years, our family found every back road between here and there. And the reason for the dreaded question is you just get a feeling for those roads. And the markers for turning left here and right there are something like a big old oak tree, spreading oak tree, or a house with a red front door, or a country store, or an old black and white dog behind a fence. You get the picture. Some years ago, I was on one of those long, lonely stretches of road through the sandhills. No houses, no country stores, or anyone in sight. It was a 100-degree day in South Carolina. All of a sudden, I heard a loud noise, and the car began to swerve. I realized I had had a tire blowout, and I was eventually able to pull the car off the road onto a dirt road. I got out to see what the trouble was. Very soon, a car pulled up, and a man got out. He had passed me going the opposite direction. He realized what had happened. He turned around and he came to my rescue. I, of course, knew nothing about the small spare tire and all that other equipment needed because it was hidden under the storage area in my station wagon. He, on the other hand, was serving in the military. He had just returned from Afghanistan. He was so kind and sweet and helpful. As he worked, I searched for my pocketbook. I found a $50 bill. While trying to find the adequate words to thank him, I handed him the money. He absolutely refused, telling me how happy he was to help me. Somehow, I found the presence of mind to ask him to please take the money. And if he didn't need it, to please pass it along to the next person that I knew he would be helping. He took the money and he thanked me, and then he carefully watched me as I drove on my way.
Pam Lacey. Pam Lacey.
Wow, that's a good one.
It was 7 a.m. on a February morning, the day of the annual horticulture symposium held at the college. There had been a lovely snow the day before, but the roads were clear, and we were expecting a large crowd for the meeting. I was in charge, and there was a lot on my mind. As I stepped out onto my porch on the way to the car, my arm full of bundles, I discovered that a large limb had fallen from the tall cedar onto the driveway. There was no way I could get my car out. So I set out on foot, and fortunately it was not too far. Flash forward to the end of the day after a successful symposium. I walked home, and was amazed to find my driveway clear. My neighbor Bob had cut up the limb, and the cedar logs were neatly stacked. I immediately found Bob to thank him. He was the hero of my day, I told him. Not another symposium has gone by over the years that I don't remember his kindness. Bob will always be my symposium hero.
Oh, thank you. Dangerous guy. Yeah. And then I'll come to the other side. Yeah. Got some orange here.
Mine's a little different, and it has a title, One Kindness Leads to Another. One Sunday at the worship service in a Presbyterian church in Miami, Florida, the minister said, "A baby has been born into one of our families. The baby has Down syndrome and will be treated just like any other child. The staff knows little about this condition, so if anyone knows anything about this condition, could you please help educate the staff and say something to a minister at the door as you're leaving?" Immediately, I knew I needed to respond. In my previous position at the University of Washington, I had directed the Center for Children with Down Syndrome with sites in other states and countries. In my present position at the University of Miami School of Medicine, I directed a program for very young children, and many had this condition. I spoke to the minister at the door and told him I could help the staff and could help the family get the services they would need. This minister's accent sounded Southern. That's unusual in Miami, like mine. So I asked if he was from the Carolinas. His response was, "Does 4 years at Davidson College count?" I assured him I knew Davidson. My father was an alum, and I had attended dances. A couple of days later, he called me for a dinner date, and the rest is history. We were married a few months later.
Oh, because you have to go to choir. Yeah.
My story begins when I discovered. My story begins when I discovered that I forgot to obtain a visa for a trip to Japan with my 6-year-old son Bryant before Christmas in 1981, and we were at the San Francisco airport. As I was absorbing the shock, an airport attendant instructed me there was a good possibility that if we returned the same time the following morning, they could put us on the airplane, which was scheduled to fly out at the same time. Quickly, with directions to Japanese embassy in my hand, we headed out with our luggage and got on a train. Without any issue, we arrived at our destination, but now the embassy was closed for 2 hours during their lunch break. In a hurry, I filled out a few documents, then waited again. There was another woman in the room, and we started talking. After sharing my situation, she offered me help to find a good Japanese hotel nearby and promised to take us back to the airport early in the next morning. That evening, she called again and assured me that everything would be all right and told me to rest well. The next morning came. She came on time and drove us to the airport, and we said a hurried goodbye. Now we are safely on the airplane, bounded to Haneda International Airport. But I was concerned how well I could find a connecting flight to my home from Tokyo once we arrived. Meanwhile, we were getting acquainted with a person sitting next to us. Brian was always a good traveler. and soon we started some conversation. It happened that he was an executive of a Japanese airline, and he wanted to help us reconfirm our reservation for the connecting flight, and also reserve a room at airport hotel, which was promised for the day before. With his help, all went well. Now, how could I forget such amazing displays of kindness from two total strangers in my great time of need? My son and I got safely to my family's home on Shikoku Island, only one day later than planned.
Barbara, maybe?
And then Sterling,
And then Sterling.
yeah, next.
Okay, well,
And it has to be really
Right
close
next
to your mouth.
mouth.
right, like this.
Even closer.
Okay,
Very good.
how's that?
Yeah.
Well, this concerns an essay I wrote for some class years ago, and it is about an experience I had in Montreat when I was a teenager, and I had been invited to go with a friend there for a few days. It's about hiking down from Mount Mitchell after an overnight there with a youth group. So I'll begin this little thing I wrote. The air was crystal clear, and the quickening breeze made the treetops sway in syncopated rhythm. Just to the right of the steep, stony path, a brook sparkled and gurgled its way down a jagged ravine. Climbing the slope to the left were clumps of dew-tipped laurels, resplendent in the morning sunlight. There were no mosquitoes here, in contrast to the steamy camp from which we had just come the day before. I walked a little ahead of my friend Phyllis. The chatter and laughter of the others echoed around us as we trooped blissfully along the narrow mountain path. We stopped to gather buttercups, and underneath a tree we found two sticks to steady our path along, to steady our steps along the rocky path. Just when and where the other voices disappeared, we could never quite pinpoint. But while we waited for those behind to catch up, that unnatural silence suddenly resounded on the surface of our awareness. We knew in an instant that we were lost and alone in the forest. Happiness drained away like sand through a sieve, and we were totally engulfed by a sense of unease. The rustling foliage, so soothing moments before, seemed suddenly ominous, and we quickened our pace. Should we rush ahead in hopes of catching up, or perhaps retrace our steps, searching for those behind? Noisy groups of youngsters do not simply vanish from mountain paths. The futility of both plans of action became increasingly apparent as we encountered only scurrying lizards or startled birds. Diverging paths, unnoticed before, provided further complications. Then panic yielded to reason, and we sensibly decided that our plight must be approached in the spirit of adventure. After all, paths must end someplace, and we determined to follow the most promising trail to its ultimate conclusion. Our spirits were further uplifted by visions of glory as we imagined the joyful welcome we long-lost heroines were bound to receive. Some 3 hours later, this confidence paid off as a strip of road appeared in the distance. A passing motorist offered us a lift, and taking pity on aching feet, went extra miles to deposit us at Montreat. We'd better let them know we're safe, said I, and we headed straight for the director's office. Found? Queried she. Well, nobody reported you missing. Joy was pricked by thorns of betrayal as two unsung heroines realized that they had not even been missed. And I just added this. It was then that we understood what the kindness of a passing stranger can make in one's life.
This story is one that occurred when I was coaching at Davidson and decided to take a family trip to visit two aunts and an uncle who lived in Detroit, Michigan. We had a Ford station wagon, which I had purchased from the athletics department at Davidson, and 4 children, 2, a son who was 2, and 3 girls, 7, 8, and 10. We were visiting with our favorite aunt, and our uncle decided that he would take us on a tour of the zoo in Detroit. And if many of you remember, that time in Detroit, Michigan was shortly after the riots had occurred, and the city was, as you drove through, areas were burned, and it was pretty scary looking. Well, we went to the zoo and then decided to take a tour of Belle Isle, which is an island park in the Detroit River. While there, we were watching the ships pass by on the river and having some fun walking around. I got in the car to return, and it wouldn't start. Uncle Johnny was a bit panicked because he was afraid that we'd be stuck somewhere down in an area of Detroit, which was a pretty scary place at the time. We waited, we called AAA, waited about 4 hours for them to get there. By the time they arrived, it was dark, or getting dark. Uncle Johnny was getting more and more nervous, of course. The technician with AAA decided that he would jumpstart the car and unfortunately put the jumper cables on the wrong terminals. And of course that burned up the regulator and damaged the alternator probably. But he managed to get the car started. So it was running, we got in the car and we crossed our fingers and drove several miles back to my aunt's apartment. And when we would come to an intersection, we would just sort of roll through and make sure we didn't stop the car. We managed to get back to the apartment, thanked our lucky stars, went to bed that night. The next morning was a Sunday morning. I got up and went down and thought, I'll see if it'll start, because we were supposed to come home the next day. For some reason or other, it turned over and started, and I thought I better find a station to see if we can find a mechanic. And so I decided that I would drive out Grand River, which is a major highway in Detroit, away from the city, so I wouldn't get down in the city. Drove several miles, and the only service station that was open was a Shell station I finally found, and it said mechanic on duty. I pulled in, the attendant came out, and it was a young guy, and he said, well, he wasn't the mechanic, but it was his father. And he said he would call him, and he called his dad. He came in about 30 minutes on a Sunday morning. Saw our North Carolina license plate, and he said, where are you from? And I said, Davidson, North Carolina. He said, well, I grew up in Statesville. He worked for the next 6 hours, managed to replace the alternator, the voltage regulator, got us on our way, charged me $90, which was the cost of the alternator. I said he could have charged me $300 or $400 or $500 or $1,000, and I would have paid it. So I was eternally thankful, of course, for his kindness in doing that, and also a great believer, I think, in providence. So we were able to get on our way the next day, and I've never really forgotten this fellow.
Yes.
About 24 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I had surgery, I had the whole caboodle. A lot of chemotherapy and so on. People were so kind throughout. I was just awash in kindness. But three quick things turned out that I want to share with you. One was three friends who had decided to go to the Grand Canyon, and they were going to go and hike down and come back up. And when they got back, they told me that they had hiked down, and when they got in the center of it, that the three, all in one voice, called my name. I felt like it was a different kind of prayer. The next thing I would like to share with you was one day I looked out on my porch, and here was a little angel. And I looked around for who had brought it to me, and I couldn't find it. So I started thinking, and it worried me until it dawned on me that it was an act of kindness, and they didn't want me to know who did it or that somebody did it. And the third thing involves somebody in this room who I looked out one day, and she was on her hands and knees, and she was planting flowers in my backyard, pansies, and it was a job of love. So those three things are just samples, but ones that stand out in kindness.
I have one, but anybody else? Yeah, I'll say it because everybody else. I grew up in a small town as a preacher's kid. My father was a minister in one of the main churches. He was active in the community, and everyone knew him. And like many small towns in the early 50s, everyone knew who was doing what. My parents were kept well informed on what their kids did. They seemed to know everything I did and where I went. I remember one time, maybe I was 12, I sat on the roof over our garage, and it wasn't that high, just to get some space and more expansive view. And a neighbor called and told my parents I was out on the roof. I couldn't get away with anything, so I didn't trust adults. My father was strict. We weren't allowed to laugh in our house, and we were not allowed to read or have any comic books. And I longed for comic books. So I tried stealing them. There was a local Woolworths, and I used to walk there holding my mom's Good Housekeeping magazines. At the back of the store was a wooden shelving area where all the comic books were displayed. So I went back there and slowly, carefully, tucked 2 or 3 comic books between my mom's magazines. It worked the first time and the second time. But the third time, as I was carefully smuggling comic books, the manager came out from behind the wooden shelf. I hadn't realized that this shelf was actually a wall of his office and that there were holes in the shelf. And of course, he had seen me. I was caught. Mr. Jones was his name, and he knew who I was, the preacher's kid. I must have looked horrified. I was scared to death. Stealing is the worst thing I had ever done, and if he had told my father, the consequences were terrifying. I begged him not to tell my father. He looked at me with warmth and kindness and asked why I was stealing comic books. I told him that we were not allowed to have or read any comic books. And you know what he said? Every week, I load all the out-of-date comic books into the trunk of my car. He told me what day and what time, although I can't remember now when that was. And he continued, if you come to my store, the store, on that day and time, I will give you all the comic books you want. I didn't trust adults, but I decided to test him. And I showed up the next week at the designated time. And he was there.
And just like he promised, he told me to take all the comic books I wanted. I'm sure my face radiated surprise and amazing gratitude. I can take all I want? Yes, all you want. I was showered with abundance. I went back the next week, but not the third week. I didn't need to or even want to. There was an adult who I trusted. I didn't need to steal, and I didn't even crave comic books as much as I had before. Mr. Jones changed my life, and I never got a chance to thank him. But my hope is that he knew the gift he had given me, not in the comic books, but in standing up for me, for understanding me, and for welcoming me into the world of abundance.
Thank you to all of you, both for participating and for listening. That is an incredible gift. I feel like the heart was just kind of like the branches. It's really grown. So thank you so much, and I imagine that you will continue to think about these little moments that really resonated and expanded. So we do have a bit of time left, so I'm going to just show these two.
From Hidden Brain Media.
Thank you.
I'm Shankar Vedanand. This is my unsung hero, stories where one person reached out to help another in a time of need.
Hello, my unsung hero story is from a doctor I heard over 30 years ago.
I'm a hero because he rarely got any recognition for his huge heart and his unselfish actions.
You mean the world to me, and I can't thank you enough.
Today's story comes from Justin Horner. In 2010, Justin was driving down a busy freeway in Portland, Oregon, when his tire blew out. He pulled over to the side of the road, made a sign that said he needed help, and waited. 3 hours later, right as he was about to try to hitchhike, a van pulled up.
And out bounded, I guess, what I would call my unsung heroes. It was a migrant working family, agricultural family that was in Oregon picking fruit. And they didn't speak any English, save for their youngest daughter, who was probably like 5 or 6. She spoke a bit of English, and they just immediately set about helping.
The father found a log on the side of the road, sawed a chunk out of it, and used it to lift the car. He gave Justin his lug wrench to remove the busted wheel. But the wrench was flimsy, and before he knew it, it was broken.
I just sheared the head clean off of it. And the guy just took it from me, and he immediately gave it to his wife. They had a short conversation, and she got in the van and took off. It was explained to me that she was going to go replace it, and she was back in no time. When she returned, we were able to get the wheel off, and we were able to get the spare on, and it was just amazing. And, when we got finished, she even produced this big water jug, what you would dump on a coach at the end of a winning football game. And we were able to wash our hands, and I just thanked them and thanked them and thanked them. And I tried to give her money. I only had a $20 bill, and I just thought, you drove around, you've been here for an hour. It's the least I could do. And she just wouldn't take it. And, I understood, they just wanted to help, but I was really adamant about giving them this money. I eventually just kind of put it in her hand, and I just said, there's no way I'm taking this money, and I kind of walked away. And it was when I walked away that their little girl called out. She asked me if I was hungry. And in fact, I was starving. I was on my way to lunch when I had the blowout, and she brought me a tamale from their cooler and thanked me, and I thanked her, and she jumped in the car, and they just took off. And as they're trying to get into traffic, I unwrap the tamale, and my money is in the tamale, right? They can unwrap the tamale, they put the 20 in, and they wrapped it back up. And I just immediately get out of the car, and I run up to the van. He's still trying to get into traffic, and he rolls down his window. He sees me coming, and he's just shaking his head. And I keep saying like, por favor. Like, I'm holding the bill out, and he just kind of puts his hand up, and he just, with this big smile on his face, he just says, "Today you, tomorrow me." And he gave me a wave, and he rolled up the window and drove onto the road and took off. The last thing I saw was his daughter in the back, just waving goodbye. And I never saw him again. It's weird. It just seemed like some, chicken soup for the soul kind of thing, right? Today you, tomorrow me. Like, it could have been you, it could have been me. But when you start taking it apart, it's kind of big. I think at the end of the day, it just shows you that everyone can be vulnerable in a given situation and that everybody needs help.
Justin Horner lives in Troy, Montana. You can share your unsung hero with us. Go to myunsunghero.org for instructions on how to record your story. If you liked today's episode, please be sure to share it with a few friends. You never know when you might inspire someone else to become an unsung hero. I'm Shankar Vedantan. See you soon.
I love how similar that story is to James. Okay, are we good for one more? Sure. Okay.
From Hidden Brain Media, I'm Shankar Vedantan. This is My Unsung Hero, stories where one person reached out to help another in a time of need.
I would like to thank my unsung hero. I do not know her name. All of a sudden I look up and his hand slides 2 warm chocolate chip cookies across the desk.
This day, it was one of the nicest things anyone has ever done for me.
Today's story comes from Heather Harper. In 2016, Heather and her husband were expecting their 5th child. It was a surprise pregnancy, but they were thrilled.
Everything was going perfectly fine with the pregnancy until one day at 5 months, I realized I did not feel the baby move that day. My doctor had me come in for an ultrasound, and my worst fears were confirmed when we saw on the screen our little baby with no movement in his heart. I had to be induced and deliver his body. He was 9 inches long and he weighed 9 ounces. We named him Desmond, and 2 days later, we had a small graveside service and a burial for him. The weeks that followed this were the hardest time in our lives. Eventually, I had to force myself to go out of the house, and one of the first places I would go was church. Many people at church were quite kind. Many people were afraid to speak to me or look at me because I know they didn't know what to say. One Sunday, I was so overwhelmed that I stepped out of the chapel and I sat down on a sofa in the foyer just to be alone for a few minutes. Not long after this, a woman came out and sat on the opposite end of the sofa. We didn't speak to each other or even look at each other. I didn't know her very well. She had been a Sunday school teacher for one of my children a few years before this, but she was older than my own mother, so we didn't really run in the same social circles. Anyway, in the silence between us in the foyer, without looking at me, she said in a loud and clear voice, "My baby died 35 years ago, and not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of her. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you are grieving for too long." I was too shocked and overcome to speak. All I could do was nod, and My eyes were filled with tears. And then she left and she returned to the meeting. Her words were what I needed to hear in that moment of my life. I needed to know that I would never be the same again, and that it was normal to be that way, and that I wasn't broken, that there was nothing wrong with grief, no matter how long it lasted. And most of all, she let me know that I wasn't alone. She opened up to me about the most painful and intimate thing in the world, and that was what I needed.
Heather Harper lives in Newburgh, Indiana. She says her unsung hero taught her the importance of acknowledging someone else's pain, even when you don't know what to say. If you like today's episode, please be sure to share it with a few friends. You never know when you might inspire someone else to become an unsung hero. I'm Shankar V. Duncan. See you soon.
Oh,
From Hidden Brain Media,
I do have one more, but I feel like it's 20 of, I feel like those were the two
Well,
that I
I
wanted
think
to hear.
I think this has just been an incredible time together where we shared stories of our lives and we understand and feel a lot closer to one another because we know something about someone we didn't know before. Is there anything, yeah? Is there
And I'd
anything
like
else
to add
say?
to that, Shawn, this experience has really brought so many other experiences in my own head as I listen to people, and I just realized how really blessed we are with so many things. Thanks for helping us think about that. Acknowledge that.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to say a few words of, yes? Okay.
These are available on YouTube if you ever just want to, you need a moment to watch one, you can find them pretty easily.
Anyone else want to speak about our sharing our time today? I can tell by your faces and by the depth of what we've experienced, and Shawn. It's just wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you'll be with us again. So next week, should I mention next week? Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
I'm telling everybody else. Next week, Dr. Jaya Jha is an associate professor of economics at Davidson College. Her PhD is from the University of Minnesota, and she teaches in the fields of economic growth, macroeconomics of development, and applied time series analysis. She's going to be with us next week, and then we'll have additional professors the following week. So I'm not sure, and John's not sure exactly what she's going to talk about, but we've been discussing with her the topic.
Something, if I remember right, it's something politics, economics and politics. Seems way above my head. Probably not yours, but mine. But it sounded interesting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. Hope you'll be here, and thank you everyone for being here today.